Hello and welcome to the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast. I am Jason, and with me as usual is Rich. Hello, Rich.
What's going on?
Well, we have enjoyed the first two episodes of the Last Dance documentary about Michael Jordan and the 1997-98 Bulls. Really expanding really way beyond those Bulls and really a retelling of the career of Michael Jordan, career of Scottie Pippen. I'm sure getting into some of the key players as well. After we get more on Phil Jackson, more on Jerry Krause, more on Jerry Reinsdorf, I imagine. But obviously some really interesting stuff here. A lot that we knew, but I learned at least a few new things, and certainly just getting the footage of all the stuff that's happening in 97 and 98 and digging into the archives. It's a really fun time.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I'm somebody who's probably seen, I think, every one of the Bulls documentaries over the years, all the Jordan documentaries all over the years. I was basically raised on those documentaries in my life, and there's still stuff that I've never seen before. I know I've never seen before, and there's 4 or 5 different prominent Michael Jordan documentaries out there, or Bulls documentaries, or those end of the year documentary things, and there's still a lot of stuff because usually a lot of those are what's going on the court, what's going on in plain sight of the press, and what's going on in plain sight of everybody else. But this is the first time you've seen a lot of the backstage stuff and seen a lot of behind the curtain and behind the before they get out to the courts and on the bus and in Paris and that sort of stuff. So it's really cool to kind of see that stuff, and it's pretty amazing that a lot of this footage was basically under lock and key for 2 decades at this point, and now it's kind of out and in the open, and it's come at a perfect time in our lives as well, because this was really cool because it did feel like an event that everybody I knew was watching it, all my friends were watching it, everybody on Twitter was watching it, everybody that my parents are like, hey, are you watching it? One of those things where it's really cool that everybody kind of comes together, because there's so few things in our life right now that are like this, now, where we can all just universally watch something and react to something and live through something at the same time. So it was perfect timing for this as well. But I really enjoyed the first 2 episodes.
Yeah, for sure. And I had some skepticism of when this first announced. I'm like, okay, a 10-part series about this, haven't we already gone over this? And you can kind of approach this sort of thing in 2 ways. You can fully tell the story, or you can perpetuate the myth. And I think so far I'm seeing a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B.
I'd say so as well. Yeah, one of my initial worries with this, and anybody who ever listens to the Overback Classic NBA podcast know that we're not, if you're here for worship of Michael Jordan, you might want to go elsewhere. That's never what we've done, and I think we've always been fair with him, and that's why I always ask of everybody is just be fair with his legacy. Talk about one of if not the greatest basketball players of all time. None of us are going to argue that. Jason and I are not going to say, oh no, you know what, barely the top 10, or
right.
No, he's one of the greatest players of all time, and if you said he was the greatest player of all time, I'm not going to argue with you, ever. I would be the stupidest argument ever.
Which I have to say, now knowing that he willingly went golfing with Danny Ainge, kind of now, I'm not really under consideration anymore.
That's true. Now officially, because Kareem's would never hang out with Danny fucking Ainge, even for 2 seconds of his life.
Way.
So you're right. No. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar now officially the greatest basketball player of all time. We can now officially say that here. But no,
Kareem. Yeah.
But that's not us. I mean, we're not the, kind of those cheerleaders or whatnot, but we want stuff to be fair and whatnot. And I think, that was my worry. And I do hope that we see a little bit more of, I think you saw a little bit of it here, the Scott Burrell, I'm not going to give you a hug thing, the, screaming at teammates or whatnot. But all of it was done so far under the guise of, this guy just really wanted to win, or he just really wanted to win a championship. And we know that people that have played with them, people that at the time, if we've read the Jordan rules, we know, for a lot of guys, it wasn't, he just wanted to win. A lot of guys, it was very, very annoying and very bad, and Kukoc and stuff. We haven't heard yet from Tony Kukoc, which I'm kind of surprised whatsoever. Right. Really, the one thing, and we'll get to it when we kind of do a breakdown of the episodes, is it felt like so far we haven't really. I don't think I've learned anything new about Michael Jordan that I didn't already know. Maybe there's some other people that are that way. But right now, he is just the competitor that really wants to win and is doing everything he can to win and yada, yada, yada. And there's all this turmoil going around the Bulls. That's what we have so far with this documentary. Michael Jordan is basically the same as he's always been, and now let's shine a light on Jerry Krause and what he was doing to the team, and Scottie Pippen and why he wanted to retire and stuff. We haven't even delved into to Rodman at all. We haven't even gotten to Kukoc and all
Right.
that sort of stuff. So
Sure.
I mean, it's the first 2 episodes of 10. Obviously, there's plenty of time to tell the story,
Right.
but so
Sure.
far, I don't know that you and I, or people that are really astute basketball fans, quote unquote, learned all that much in these 2 episodes, even if they were really, really well done.
Yeah, no, and I agree, and I think yeah, as you said, you'll be talking about those players, in the future. But as far as Jordan, yeah, the negative stuff, I think for the most part, as you talked about, is under the guise of, oh, he's a competitor, oh, he really just wants to win,
Mm-hmm.
oh, he just really, so that's why he yells at his teammates, and that's why he's a jerk to people around him. In '86, we'll get into that a little bit with the injury. Talking about the fight with management, it's like, oh, I just really want to get out. I want to get out there. I was ready. All that kind of stuff without getting into the like, oh, maybe it would have actually been a better idea for him not to play the rest of that year. That kind of stuff. And it's definitely, I think the one thing that you're getting a little bit, that's a little bit more on the negative end is the fact that he and Pippen, were picking on Krause a lot and calling him names and stuff, and you got a sense of that treatment a little bit, but I think it's definitely less favorable to Krause than it is to Jordan and Pippen in
Right.
terms of, you know, he, he's talked about Brady negatively. They do bring up, okay, yeah, he did a good job building the team, and that's really, I mean, that's kind of the legacy of Krause, is like he mostly did a legit great job as general manager
Right.
of building and sustaining that team, of putting the pieces around Jordan, getting Grant, getting Pippen, making all the right moves later, trading Oakley for Cartwright, getting Steve Kerr, getting Rodman for basically nothing, that kind of stuff. He did that, but
Right, signing Kukoc,
right, yeah,
when actively the other teammates did not want
they
him,
did not
mainly
want him,
Jordan
right?
Pippen.
Yeah, yeah, and most of those moves that he did were not like, very few of them were slam dunk moves. A lot of them, Pippen and Grant were basically, especially Pippen was plucked out of obscurity. So,
Yeah.
but he did this incredible job as general manager for the most part, with the huge caveat of alienating the biggest star in NBA history, and pretty much every other player, and one of the greatest coaches in history. With the understanding that all these guys were complicated, difficult personalities, and and had their own agendas as well. So it wasn't like he was like alienating the nicest guys ever. All these guys, they're complicated people,
Right.
as we all are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think you and you wrote this in our notes. We'll get to it here in a little bit, in a little bit more detail. But you did mention one interesting quote where Jerry Reinsdorf talks about, Krause was getting in the way, and like he wasn't getting along with Jordan, he wasn't getting along with Jackson, he wasn't doing all this sort of stuff. And you kind of
Yeah.
posed the question, well, like if Reinsdorf knew that this all wasn't working, and that if Krause was getting in the way, like why didn't he just get rid of Krause, or why didn't he do something? And the real easy answer to that is, and throughout this documentary, it's been pretty apparent that this is the direction we're going to go here, is being the public face, or the representative of Jerry Reinsdorf, takes on a certain thing as well. Let's
Yes.
not
Right.
let Jerry Krause. I'm sure Jerry
Yeah.
Reinsdorf wasn't saying, hey, you know what, yeah, let's work out this deal with Pippen, or let's find a way to scrap up
Right.
the contract and give him, $20 million more dollars, or let's, hey, yeah, screw it, let's give Phil Jackson a 9-year deal. Like I live under, the Jerry Reinsdorf. I'm a White Sox fan. I'm a Bulls fan. I understand
Sure.
life with Jerry Reinsdorf. I've been living life with Jerry Reinsdorf, with the John Paxson, the Gar Paxson, like the post Thibodeau era, the Tim Floyd. Like I've lived all that. It's not that easy. It's not an easy job, and a lot of men have not succeeded where Jerry Krause did succeed, I should say, in light of a lot of the way that Jerry Reinsdorf wants to approach. So I do find it a little annoying that like the guy who's dead and can't defend himself is the one that we're like, hey, look at this
Right.
asshole. And
Yeah.
Jerry Reinsdorf, who's here and can say, oh yeah, no, this is what this was, and that was that. It's kind of everything's good, and nobody really cares about that, and I knew that was going to happen, because it always happens in this case, because Jerry
Sure.
Krause is an easy guy to pick on and whatnot. But
Right.
I am a little worried that we're just going to get like very heavy into the Jerry Krause thing. And the only thing I would say is I do hope that they do show maybe how awful those guys were to him, because anybody who was around in the locker rooms was like, yeah, Jordan would just needle this guy about his weight every day. Call him
Right.
crumbs, call him fat.
Yeah.
There was a little bit there
Yeah.
where he's going like, oh, you're so short, or hey, those diet pills, or
Yeah.
and it was just like this real little one or whatever. But like people said, like, Pippen and Jordan, and then by proxy the team, all just said, oh, well, we can just make fun of this guy and call him fat and call him short and call him stupid and call him weird looking and ugly and all that sort of stuff. And people just took, pleasure in doing that. And
Yeah,
that's a pretty awful thing. Like, I think in 2020, we now know how awful that is. But
sure.
I do see the narrative kind of going around already, like, Jared Krause, what an asshole, or he looks like the guy from Space Jam, or all that sort of stuff. So I'm not
Yeah,
shocked that that's what it's kind of become. I mean, just go look at Michael Jordan's Hall of Fame speech if you want to see that this has kind of been Jordan's MO from, pretty much day one. And we see literally year 2 of his Bulls tenure is pretty much the anti-Jerry Krause thing from day one there. So
yes. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, and I think they're getting, I would say like 10% positive of Krause, 90% negative of Krause so far. And we'll see how that evolves as the documentary evolves. But I'm kind of guessing that they're definitely setting that tone. It might be hard to overcome that tone, and Krause, it could be a really difficult guy to get to deal with too. I mean, there's legitimate
oh no,
criticism.
yeah, he wasn't. I mean, he was terrible
but
at like knowing how to interact with human beings. Yeah,
right.
like he was not good.
Right, he was not good. Yeah, he did a lot of dumb things that got in his own way, and deteriorated his relationships with people. He's certainly at fault for all that stuff. But yeah, like I said, it's very complicated. So Bulls traveling cocaine circus we got as a phrase tonight, which is beautiful, which is very interesting, interestingly handled for those who don't recall. This is in reference to the 85 team that Jordan joined, as a rookie, of course, in 84 and 85. And Jordan laughed at that description of it. Said apparently there was a newspaper writer who came up with that. They were not named. And he laughed at the idea. He told a story about going into or knocking on the door of a hotel room and then going in and seeing basically most of the team and seeing, cocaine and weed and women. He was very clear that he did not partake, that he didn't even drink at the time, that he preferred to like fold his laundry and, do stuff at home. I am thinking that story is probably a little more complicated. Not that I'm accusing, Jordan of using cocaine, but I'm guessing that given what we know about Jordan's lifestyle later, that I have some doubts that he was playing it completely straight at that point. But definitely the first time where we really get into some of the dirt of the NBA at the time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that team was even notorious at, at that time,
Right.
as well as like the joke around the league was like, yeah, these dudes are all just like, it was a partying team and wasn't very good on the court, obviously, which is how they were able to get Michael Jordan. I think they did limp their way into the playoffs at that time too, which I think was a pretty funny thing that everybody kind of, I was watching and following the conversation on Twitter, and there's a lot of people that maybe don't know about NBA history or haven't followed or whatever, and people can't believe that these Bulls teams that won 38 and 30 games made the playoffs, and it's like, yeah, well, everybody like we've done podcasts about that of like
Sure.
that era of the NBA was a little weird, and like anybody there was like 3 teams that didn't make the playoffs, I think, in both leagues. So it wasn't super hard, but yeah, it is kind of funny. But no, that was I did enjoy a little bit of a look back at that era of Bulls basketball, a little George Gervin sighting as well, and just you see the crowd, and there's like literally like 300 people there.
I know.
Like, my dad told me that too. Like when he was like, watching, he was like, yeah, before Jordan, man. I mean, like we got Bulls tickets, and like at one of his jobs, they had like Bulls season tickets, and it was like, I guess I'll go. And he said we went like twice a year, but more times than not, nobody went, and they just went because like sometimes beer was like $1 or something like that. It was like never to see basketball. They had never wanted to see that team, and they were just the 70s Bulls solid team. Really, not like super contenders, but in the mix there for a few years. Man, from like the late 70s to the 80s, just nothing, man. Just a lot of Orlando Woolrich, unfortunately. So
Yes, yeah. Orlando Woolrich, Quentin Daly, that's
a lot of Dave Corzine.
Yeah, Dave Greenwood, yeah.
I can't imagine Dave Corzine having. He must have been a weed guy. I can't imagine Dave Corzine as a coke guy.
No,
or a woman guy. Dave Corzine's like, look, I don't put that stuff in my body, but I will.
No,
absolutely.
Right.
I'm so sorry if Dave Corzine or the estate of Dave Corzine is listening to this. So
yes, yes. So yeah, I mean, we're bouncing around a lot narratively here. I mean, the focus, obviously, we're moving through the months in 97, 98. They talk about winning the title in 97. They pretty openly, even Reinsdorf admitted that they, pretty seriously considered a rebuild between 97 and 98, so even before 98, the uh, negotiations with Phil Jackson for an extension were pretty contentious. Eventually, Kraus got out of the way, and then Reinsdorf and Jackson were able to negotiate that themselves. But they made it clear. Kraus made it clear only one more year, and then he's gone. Jordan, put a line in the sand and saying, if Phil's not coaching this team, I'm not going to play. So it was pretty clear that it was his last year. They openly admitted to, shopping Pippen, which made him extremely upset. I mean, of course, that had been building for years and years because of that this was not the first time they had considered trades for him, and been perpetually underpaid for the past 6-7 years. So all that frustration. But yeah, I remember going into the season that everyone was pretty sure this was going to be the last year, but I'd forgotten some of those details of how explicit they were about oh yeah, we might not even bring this back in 98.
Yeah, that's actually honestly my original memories of that as growing up as a kid and just kind of hearing and reading. I was believe it or not the coolest kid in the world, so I read a lot of newspapers and books at that time. Remember, so I know it's a shock to you, Jason.
Hard to believe.
Absolute shock of all shocks.
Cool
that I wasn't super cool and really into reading and stuff. But I do remember at the time that 97, it did feel, and you even get that and I'm glad they showed that the clip as well, where Jordan is, putting on his championship hat and getting ready, and people are like, yeah, so this thing's not coming back tomorrow next year, right? Or like, hey, what's going on for next year? Already. And you could tell Jordan, and I remember that 97 team and that 97 year was so exhausting because it was already oh, this might be it, that might be it. Jordan's got no deal, and Pippen, he doesn't want to be here, and Jackson's got no deal. And it almost did, I do remember at the time, it almost did feel like that 97 team was it, that was going to be all. And I remember how cathartic it was when they won at home, and it was like, okay, you know what? If this is it, and this is the final one, that's pretty cool that this is how they're going to go out at home. And yeah, you hear the quote from Jordan where he's just like, I don't know what's going to happen next year. And yeah, Jackson halfway through the summer, we were talking in July until they sign him and bring him back. So I do remember that 97 year being so wrought with oh geez, this could be it, that's going to be it. And it did feel so good that they finally won. It was okay, let's go. And then when they ran it back in 98, it was almost and I do remember the tone around Chicago at the same time too was it was almost exhausting. It was almost geez, we got to do this all over again now. This whole thing where every game is a referendum on, oh my God, is this team ever going to do it? And I'm sure they'll get to it in this documentary as well. But it almost when they finally won in 98, it was a sense of relief, oh, we're finally done with this. Not that, I'm glad we're finally done winning championships, but because every day and every game and every moment and every playoff series and every shot was this, oh my God. Because it felt like if they don't win, it's oh, geez, what a horrible story this was. Oh, geez, and that's why 97 was so cool. It was oh, cool, they won at home. If this is it, what a great way to go out. Whereas 98, it's oh man, what if they lose in the first round? Or and then the team starts off bad, and it's oh, geez, they might not even make the playoff. It was that sort of thing where it was almost, people weren't having fun watching the Bulls anymore because it was just you knew it was over, and it was just kind of it was wearing on people, I think, a lot at the time too.
Yeah. So just almost too much drama to the point where it's not fun anymore because it's just so exhausting. And it's interesting because, yeah, I mean, the Jordan, the Bulls never really lost, and I mean, obviously, Jordan in a full season, didn't lose after 91. We passed on 95 a little bit, but obviously it would have changed the Jordan story. I mean, if they lost in 98, as great as 5 championships in 7 years would have been, it would have lost a little bit of something. It would have shown some, a little bit of, a flaw, a little bit of, a flaw at the end of the story in terms of the Bulls. They weren't invincible anymore. They could claim to be invincible if Jordan played a full season, and that would not have been the case in 98, despite, of course, them being on the short list of the most accomplished NBA teams of all time.
Right. Yeah, it's just, it aesthetically works so much better with the 2 3-peats.
Yeah,
6
exactly.
titles. I don't know why. It just, 5's weird, 5's 6 right. For some reason 6 it I don't know, it just feels like a nice round number or something. I don't know why.
I think we're just so used to 6 that anything else.
Right.
It's hard to imagine. Yeah, I get what you're saying. But yeah, so yeah, a few more notes about the episode. Enjoyed Jordan saying that the transition to the league in '84 was pretty easy. Yeah, that was a funny line. some of the 97 stuff with teasing his teammates in France. They're playing in the McDonald's All American, or not McDonald's All American game, but I think it's a McDonald's Paris Challenge, or I forget the exact name of it, but they play an exhibition game over there, and Jordan and Rodman are there, but Pippen's not there. Or I'm sorry, I don't think Rodman was there.
Yeah,
I
don't think. Yeah, I don't think.
Right.
I don't think you get a plane.
Yeah,
I don't think you get Dennis Rodman on a plane to Paris.
Rodman,
1998.
Yeah. Rodman played, I think, pretty much the whole year.
He did, yeah. I just don't think he could actually go across country lines at that point.
Maybe not. Yes. No. France wasn't going to allow it in. Yes. So, of course, Scott Breaux wanting a hug, getting it from Ron Harper, but not getting it from Jordan.
Yeah. Good on Ron Harper for giving the man a hug. So.
Yeah, I guess Scott Breaux just wants a hug, man. That's all. Yeah. I'm sure this is going to dive into it more, but you get the sense of. Phil Jackson only talks kind of a little bit in the first couple episodes, but he'll be very much part. I think sort of feeding the ugliness between the players and management as sort of the kind of the go between there, but as using the "we hate management" as a motivational tactic, which I think maybe even added to the tension between players and management.
For sure,
and Phil kind of also adding to his control and to his power. Kind of doing that. Is interesting.
And that's an old school sports. You fooling yourself. You don't think that even happens today. That coaches will say, "Hey, look, those guys don't. The guys in that office up there think that we can't do this, but we're going to show them. We can do it." It happens all the time, and that's absolutely Phil Jackson absolutely perpetuated that. Whether it was true or false or whatever, or added or stoked the flames or whatever, he used that as hey, look. That asshole thinks that we can't do this, but let's prove him wrong or whatever. Because if he just says, yeah, they don't think this, and who cares, and we're all out of here afterwards, that's not showy. That's not going to do anything. But the motivation is, hey, let's prove that asshole wrong. Let's show him that he's an idiot and he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. So let's go.
Yeah, I think I feel like it. From the books I've read and so forth, I feel like it's shifted from motivational to manipulative in a way that Phil did, and hopefully they'll dive into that more in the documentary. I'm sure they probably will.
One thing I did want to mention, sorry, before we moved on to,
sure.
And this was a fun aspect where they talk about the draft, and I'm glad that they didn't go too much into the Sam Bowie thing, because I was a little worried about that too, because it's like, all right, we all know that Portland shouldn't have drafted.
We get it.
We know, yes, that Sam Bowie is not as good of a player as Michael Jordan. We got it. We know that. So I was glad that they just said, hey, so they drafted Sam Bowie because they had Clyde Drexler. Okay, then the Bulls got, I was glad we just got away from that. But one fun thing that I always love about that, and when they show the graphic of the 1984 NBA draft or whatever, and they show, the second overall pick is Portland via Indiana. And I'm always, because I know a lot of people don't know about this as well, and it just shows you how little, or maybe how horrible GMs were at the time, and how little they regarded draft picks, is Indiana Pacers, they traded that future first round pick in 1982 to the Portland Trailblazers for Tom Owens. You might not know who Tom Owens is. I understand that you have no clue who Tom Owens is. Tom Owens is a veteran player at the time. I think he was like 32 or whatever. He goes to Indiana for one season. He averages 10 points per game, retires a year later, and Indiana goes 35 and 47 in the year that he's there as well. Can you even if the Blazers draft Jordan at 2 and he is whatever Jordan is, can you even imagine? Especially it being Indiana next to Chicago, trading it for Tom Owen, that would have just been an ungodly, ridiculous thing. Similar to today, how I guess you don't get it as much, but the Baron Davis basically turned into Kyrie Irving thing for the Cavaliers or whatnot. There's many different examples, but I don't think anyone would have been worse than the Pacers trading Michael Jordan for a season of Tom Owens, a season of 10 points per game from 32-year-old Tom Owens. So
absolutely. So episode 2, it mostly focus on Scott Pippen, as he's announced by David Stern in the NBA draft, and the situation we've talked about it. He's under constant trade rumors. He's 122nd in salary in '98. Final season of a 7-year, $18 million deal that he signed in '91. You've talked about this before, but kind of summarize. I feel like this is a little bit misunderstood in terms of the way that it's kind of framed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I knew it was going to come up again when this episode was going on. The second I heard that Scottie Pippen's underpaid, I was like, here we go. And make no question, he was underpaid. Nobody is arguing that Scottie Pippen was underpaid in 1996 and 1995 and 1997 and 1998. Like, it was no question he was underpaid. The problem, though, is the way that the structure of the CBA was at that time, and they talk about it in Reinsdorf. There's a quote about that where they talk about the deal in 1991. Pippen signed a 7-year, $18 million deal. At the time, and you can go look at newspaper reports at the time, you can go look at newspaper reports from 1997. This is not a quote that they just came up with for this show. Is Jerry Reinsdorf saying, if I were you, I wouldn't sign this contract. You may be selling yourself too short. It's too long a contract, and you're locking yourself in for it. And that was Jerry Reinsdorf telling Scottie Pippen. And make no question, Scottie Pippen was very loud and very vocal about wanting that contract when he got it as well. He wanted it right then, that year. Lock it up. Give me my 7 years. Give me my $18 million because I need that money. And I want that money. And I want that guarantee. I don't want to get hurt and not be able to play. My back is, all this sort of stuff is going on. And at the time, he was one of the top 10 paid players in the NBA, which for Scottie Pippen in 1991 is pretty radical at the time. And Scottie Pippen turned out to be a great, great player, but top 10, player in the league in 1991, he wasn't quite there yet. He would be very soon, but he wasn't quite there yet. So the Bulls kind of stuck their neck out with this deal at the time. The problem that happened is the NBA exploded in popularity over the next 2 years. The salary cap exploded in popularity. The money exploded. Like, they're just the whole, everything that we know about the NBA as it is today kind of happened in 93, 94, 95, 96 is when everything just started going crazy, and it leads to Scottie Pippen being the 122nd salary in 1998. So they have this thing about, okay, negotiating contracts, renegotiate his contract, scratch up the deal, pay him, do whatever. And I saw a lot of that on Twitter. Oh, why didn't they just pay him? Or, oh my God, they should have just done this. Well, as a part of the CBA at that time, the team was prevented from renegotiating existing contracts. And Jerry Krause was quoted in an article in New York Times, 1997. I have it up on Twitter if you want to see Over and Back NBA on Twitter. Says, quote, and this is from 1997, "We'd like to pay him more money. He deserves more money. But all we could do right now is extend his contract by a maximum of 20% per year. But we know he's looking for a much larger payday than that." So they could have given him 20% above, but then he's the 108th highest paid player in the basketball. He's still underpaid. He's still criminally underplayed. So, like, the problem is, and they didn't address this, and I knew they weren't going to address it because, that's not sexy enough to say, look, at the time, the players had a shit CBA. They don't have that anymore. They have great CBAs. They control the CBAs. At this time, the owners control the CBAs. And Pippen signed a contract at the worst possible time because the NBA exploded in popularity and money like 2 years later. So he was locked into a long deal that his ownership told him not to sign at the time. He did it because he wanted the peace of mind, and he signed it, and then he was kind of stuck in it because the CBA didn't allow them to completely renegotiate a contract. So it was done. The reason, though, that Scottie Pippen wanted to get traded is that the CBA did say that if you got traded to a new team, that team could renegotiate your existing contract. But if you're Jerry Krause and you're Jerry Reinsdorf, you don't really want to trade Scottie Pippen. They tried. They tried like hell. They tried to trade him to Seattle in 1994 for Sean Kemp. They tried like hell to trade him because they knew he was unhappy. They knew he couldn't stand being there anymore. They knew he felt he was underpaid, and they knew he was underpaid, so they tried to trade him. But it's hard to trade Scottie Pippen in the prime of his career, so they didn't want to do it. Pippen wanted to it was this complete standoff that just was the kind of the culmination of a lot of bad luck, a bad CBA, and the players kind of getting fucked over in that CBA or whatever. So, like, yeah, it absolutely sucks that Scottie Pippen was the 122nd, salary in 1998. But without knowing the context, without knowing kind of the rules at the time, I think it does shed a light that the Bulls were just sitting in their, ivory plated office or their gold plated office going, ha ha ha, no, we're not going to pay Pippen a dime. Screw that guy. Like, that wasn't what was going on. There's many quotes there where they understand and they know that it's tenuous and it's not good, but there's nothing that they could really do other than trade him. And they didn't really want to trade Scottie Pippen. They tried, they tried like hell, but they wanted to get the right deal because they would have been raked over the coals if you trade Scottie Pippen for, draft picks and some, young player. They would get killed. They would get crucified for that. So they were in everybody was in a no-win situation. It was just a horrible situation all around.
Now, I mostly agree with what you're saying. A few things to point out is, Pippen in 91 obviously he came from a difficult background, didn't have a lot of money, wanted to take care of his parents, a lot of medical issues and stuff. So it made sense for him to want to lock in that money. Even addressed the document, it's I know, but I want to lock in that money. I needed to at the time. They couldn't after 94. Before 94, they could have renegotiated the deal. Like Reinsdorf has a policy of not doing that, but they could have done that. Maybe they could have paid him, not, he could have been like 50th in the league in salary and wouldn't have like been thrilled about that, but would have been happier at 122nd. Maybe you don't destroy that relationship. Um, and yeah, and also, again, they completely like, like, yeah, there would have been benefit to Pippen about being traded, but also like he wasn't thrilled about being traded either. Like, he wasn't thrilled about being floated out there, and there were a lot of things that were happening that were kind of disrespectful toward Pippen and his stature in the league. So,
Sure.
yeah, I get why everyone wasn't happy about it. Obviously, it totally makes sense. Another complicated situation, and I think they addressed it okay in the documentary. But I'm glad you added that context to it because I think that is important. Yeah, I mean, I think overall Pippen, I had not really, I guess I didn't quite realize that he openly admitted, like, yeah, I delayed my surgery past the summer, to kind of screw over management. Like,
Right, I never knew that too. I honestly
yeah,
thought it was just like he tried to rehab it and he was like, gosh darn, it's just not going to do. I need surgery. But he's literally like, yeah, I'll get surgery in like May or I'll get
right.
surgery in like
Yeah,
October. And it's like, oh
yeah,
man, really? Like, wow.
right. Yeah, Jordan definitely not happy about that.
No.
Phil says he kind of understood, like, yeah, I kind of get, where he's coming from on that. Yeah, obviously, I think the more famous example is Shaq doing on a company time, that he would do later in, 02 or 03 or whenever that was, to dealing with his injury.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, I mean, it's a good look at Pippen, overall, his rise as as a unheralded college player who didn't was the equipment manager when he was a freshman and then ends up being the number 5 pick overall. You get the Pippen's there's of course the famous video of Oakley slapping and pushing Pippen around in a joking manner. I'm using the finger quotes there.
Got him by the neck, for God's sakes.
Pippen did not look particularly happy in that
No.
situation, um, but
But you're not going to stand up
obviously.
to Big Oak when you're,
Oh
a
no, of
wiry
course,
21
not.
year old.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
He's
yeah.
Charles
No,
freaking Oakley. Like I would stand up to Oakley, today. God no. I mean, geez, never. I mean, I'm not the fighter, so I would never stand up to him. But like, yeah, Charles Oakley's
right,
a monster, man. Nobody's. So yeah, if he's fake choking you and fake slapping you, you're just gonna be like, yeah. This is what
right.
I want. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and but it's a nice. Obviously, we're gonna dive more into there. We get into in the '97 portion. Basically, the Bulls are struggling early on in the season without Pippen. You see Jordan voicing his frustration, yelling at Harper and Kukoc during practice about not being in the right positions or not moving fast enough or not, playing hard enough. The Bulls struggle in the beginning of the '98 season. Without them, there's as you said, a lot of Chicago's on edge about it. About okay, yeah, maybe this is going to be a championship. Maybe they're not even going to make it very far in the playoffs, kind of situation. And then we cut back to '86. The Jordan breaking his ankle, and I think the most notable thing for me is the Reinsdorf 9 out of 10 pills story. Is probably the most notable situation for me of Reinsdorf basically telling Jordan, like, hey, like, if you had 10 pills here and 9 of them were fine, but the 10th would kill you, would you take them? And then Jordan's response is, well, it depends on how fucking bad the headache is.
Right.
So, but yeah, I mean, the overall situation is basically, yeah, Jordan broke his was his foot or his ankle? I think it was his foot.
Yeah, his foot.
Third game of the season, he secretly went. He went. Well, he went back to college, not secretly, but he started. Playing like competitive like practices and 5-on-5s in North Carolina. Came back to the Bulls. They were mad about it. They thought that there was too much of a risk for him to play. They wanted to sit him out for the rest of the season, but Jordan basically kind of forced their hand and started playing, but on limited minutes. And then Jordan was pretty sure that the team was intentionally trying to tank the season to get a good draft pick, and that soured his relationship with Krause in particular, and Reinsdorf to a degree, for the rest of his time there.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting because that's a time period that they don't really talk too much about, and even me, I don't know that I knew too much about the tension between Krause and Jordan that early. I knew obviously that Jordan wanted to play when he returned, but I thought it was just basically like, hey, I want to play, and they're not letting me play type thing. I didn't quite know it was as much of the him thinking that they had a losing attitude, or him thinking that they didn't want to make the playoffs, that they wanted a higher draft pick or whatever. Which again is like at the time it's like, and I see people on Twitter being like, oh my god, what a terrible attitude that Jerry Krause has, and I'm like, half you root for teams that do that every year in the playoffs, and everybody loves it.
Right.
Like you know
Yeah,
what I mean?
right.
Like, that's some of you were Sixers fans. Like your team willingly and said openly, we're gonna lose for 4 years because it's gonna be fine. And I was like, man, you can't be raking Jerry Krause over the coals for that. Like that's a good move, honestly. But no, like I get it. Like yeah, I get the attention that Jordan had, and it is pretty interesting too that right there you start seeing between Stan Albeck and the coach at the time and Jerry Krause, and the tension already there. So already from that point forward, from that year, it's already coach players versus management in a lot of ways, where Jerry Krause is trying to get into the room to say, hey, I cannot believe, we'll talk about that game, here in a bit where Jordan, was on a minutes restriction, and Stan Albeck went a little bit over that and let him play a little bit longer. And Jerry Krause is trying to get into the locker room to scream at Albeck or do whatever, and Albeck just doesn't let him in. He just locks him out of the room or whatever, and that's going to kind of start that tension right there and start the relationship. So I was kind of glad to hear that and glad to see that, because I had no idea that it had started that early, and I think that sort of sets the stage for what's going to happen now. For what made everything so exhausting by when it was all done is it's like, oh man, we've been doing this since 1987. For God's sakes, we've been doing this over 10 years. This like push and pull and tension between these two. So I was glad, because I think that will help frame it a little bit better. That this Last Dance is there's a lot building into this, and a lot that's been going on already for the last decade or whatever, and it's not just something that popped up the last 2 years or whatever. So I thought that was cool, and yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I learned from that year as well. And anytime we get to watch some really old school, like bad, late 80s Golden State Warriors footage or stuff like that was pretty cool. And I always do like that year too, when Jordan came in. He per 36 minutes that year, even with that minutes limit, 32.6 points per game per 32 minutes right there. His second highest of all time. The highest he ever had was the next year, where per 36 he had 33.4. So yeah, he pops up off the bench, plays his 20 minutes a game or whatever, 7 minutes and a half or all that sort of stuff, and still, I think at the end of the year he still averaged 22 points a game, which is just unbelievable. But that's Michael Jordan, good player.
Hey, when you've got Gene Banks feeding you, you're obviously gonna.
Oh yeah, exactly. What a team. Yeah. We have the corpse of George Gervin on your, and Rod Higgins. We saw a lot of George Gervin. I was glad. So no Mike Schreck yet, but maybe maybe.
No Mike Schreck. Hopefully, hopefully.
I don't know when or why or how, but I think I'm hopeful.
Hey, I'm hopeful too. Yeah. I think the highlight for me, another highlight for me, was the footage of Jordan scoring 63 on the Celtics to LL Cool J's "I'm Bad," which is one of my favorite songs from that time. So that was really good. Yeah, the music's really good overall. I mean, they do a really nice job of picking like very cool but period appropriate music for everything. So yeah, very cool. I think of course the fashions are another standout. I honestly, I think the 90s fashions are like more jarring to me than the 80s ones. Like I feel like the 90s ones have aged more poorly than the 90s ones have aged more poorly than the 80s ones.
Oh, for sure. Oh yeah. 90s fashion is it's bad. It's not good. I lived it. I was a part of it. You were a part of it. We all were.
Right.
I don't know what we were doing. Yeah, I don't know why we wore the things we wore.
But the 80s is more endearingly bad. It's bad too, but it's more, I don't know, it's more quaint for
right. And the 70s the same way too. Like the 70s, I like the 70s fashion. There's a lot of people that don't, but I like the idea that like people just look like they were wearing like curtains as like pants. Like,
yes. Yeah. Exactly.
People wearing couches as pants or whatever, and I was like, that's kind of cool. But yeah, the 90s, it's just like things are like weirdly baggy, and the designs are all terrible, and it's people always had weird hats. There's always terrible hats in the 90s. Like
terrible hats.
Jordan is not the good. Unfortunately, the problem with Michael Jordan is one of the worst all time like dressers of all time.
Right. He was.
I know nothing about fashion, but I know that Michael Jordan has no idea about fashion. Like
he was very unfashionable.
Still, like he shows up in one of the interviews. I thought he was wearing swim trunks, and I look, and they're like, I guess they're like the army fatigue. They were like, I guess like camouflage, but they were like blue, and I'm like, man, like you're Michael Jordan. Like just pay somebody to say, here, Michael, put this on, and then he goes, okay, and he puts it on. Like if I was rich, I would just have somebody that said, here's what you wear to go out. I would go, thank you. That makes things a lot easier, and I would go out and wear it.
Hire Clyde Frazier, just that.
Right, hire Clyde.
That would have been easy. Yeah,
but it's endearing at this point too, where like he's wearing like a triple XL, like Under Armour blue, and you're like, what are you doing? Like, why are you still dressing like this?
Yeah. Well, Jordan is so like he's weird because he is so, of course, he's one of the most popular athletes of all time, the biggest basketball star of all time. Um, and in a certain way is extremely cool, but is so not cool in other ways. That it's almost hard to judge overall whether Michael Jordan is actually cool. I mean, I think of like, you know, I think of Jordan in the same way that I think of Miss America. Like Miss America is extremely beautiful, but there's no way Miss America can be sexy. And I feel the same way about Michael Jordan. Like Michael Jordan can, is like this stunning, huge, popular star, but I don't think Jordan, after a certain point, could ever be cool.
Right, right. There was a point too, like in the '90s, where people did sort of start dressing and acting and mimicking Jordan a lot, but then like we all kind of moved on, and he's kind of
Right.
there still. And it
Yeah.
is kind of interesting to see that, because you're mentioning the '90s, you're mentioning the weird stuff that he was wearing, but at the time, a lot of stuff that he was doing, the hats that he was wearing, the style of, like, he always wore like turtlenecks and whatnot, and that sort of stuff became popular. People started really kind of wearing that and adapting that. The bald head, that became like a real in thing. And then, like, yeah, the problem is, like, in like 2001 and 2002, we all moved in this one direction, and Michael's just kind of
Right.
still there. But in a way, it's kind of endearing, like you said. So,
Yeah. Sure. Sure. Anything else before we go?
not really. I thought, the overall, I really did enjoy it, and I thought there was some really cool stuff. And yeah, I'm interested to see moving forward, more than anything, as you said, kind of the way that they're clipping this together, and a lot of the music they've used so far has been really, really cool. The 2 hours flew by. I couldn't believe I had been sitting there for
Yeah.
2 hours
Right.
watching
Yeah.
it. Very few commercials I thought was pretty cool, as well, because you never felt like you were left the story. You felt like you were kind of always in the story and ready for the story. I did see some people complaining about the bouncing around, but I think they did a really good job of telling you that they were bouncing around, and literally in some cases showing you where they were bouncing around. Like, they had like the little timeline thing that would be like, hey,
Right.
1986,
Yeah.
like, to tell you,
I
hey, this is why we're going back to here, and this is. So I get that, like, some people might not have liked that it was bouncing back and forth, but I appreciate that. I like, because you need to tell the stories of the past to tell the story of whatever they're going to tell right now. So I had no issue with that, but I did see some people had a few complaints about it. So,
Yeah, I thought they did a good job of making connections between what they're talking about in the past and in the present of the movie, which is '98. So, yeah, no, I didn't have an issue with that. That'll be interesting to see how that continues. So
mhm.
cool. Well, everyone, thanks for hanging out with us. Of course, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook at Over and Back NBA. If you like what we're doing, please leave a rating or review on Stitcher or Apple Podcasts, wherever we're pretty much everywhere. If you want to do that, and also we're at the Step Back at fansided.com. So all
Mhm.
great NBA coverage there. So check that out. And until next time, back again soon.